This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll just give it a minute or so for attendees to come in. All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's just after 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kira Zeileman. I'm a technical manager at NARUC Center for Partnerships and Innovation. And I am pleased to introduce Commissioner John Gavin from the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, who's going to moderate today's discussion on HALEU fuels. Commissioner, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Kira, and thank you very much to the NARUC team for setting this session up. And welcome everyone to the Nuclear Energy Partnership webinar. This is our third DOE NARUC Nuclear Energy Partnership webinar, and I'm pleased to welcome everyone to this discussion on understanding and solving the HALEU nuclear fuel supply chain challenges that we face. Today's webinar we recorded with the recording and slides posted on NARUC's website and emailed to attendees next week. In March of 2021, just about a little less than a year ago, NARUC formally launched the 5-year Nuclear Energy Partnership program with support from the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. Through this educational initiative, NARUC provides opportunities for state public service commissioners and commission staffs to better understand barriers and possibilities related to the U.S. nuclear fleet, the nation's largest source of zero carbon power. And I really want to thank the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy for their wonderful support in this program. And today we're going to be talking about the subject of HALEU, high assay, low enriched uranium, which may seem a little esoteric to you initially, but it's also the fuel that many of the advanced nuclear reactors that are in development will require. And we have somewhat of a limited supply chain presently in place in the US. So the intent of this session is to kind of give you an overview of the challenges related to this supply chain and what we may do about to resolve them in the future. And today we have an absolutely fabulous lineup of speakers. The people you see on the screen today are the rock stars of the whole nuclear fuel cycle issue in the United States. So we're so lucky to have this caliber of people participating. And with that, I'd like to give some quick backgrounds on each one of our presenters. First, Dr. Monica Regalbuto is the director of the Nuclear Fuel Cycle Strategy Program at the Idaho National Lab. And Dr. Regalbuto is a leader in the development of nuclear fuel cycle technologies, combining her knowledge in separations, computer simulations, and proliferation risk reduction. She has over 30 years of experience in radioisotope processing, recovery, and immobilization for environmental remediation, resource conservation, and medical applications. Monica currently leads the Integrated Fuel Cycle Strategic Initiative at the Idaho National Lab. And in this role, she serves as the lead for the high assay, low enriched uranium, or the HALEU program that we're going to be talking about today. And is responsible for ensuring there's an adequate supply of HALEU fuel for advanced reactors and other applications. Following Monica, Andy Griffith, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Department of Energy, Office of Nuclear Fuels, Cycle, and Supply Chain will speak. Andy was appointed in September 2019 to the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Fuel Cycle and Supply Chain for the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy. Mr. Griffith leads DOE's research and development on advanced nuclear fuel cycle technologies that have the potential to improve resource utilization and energy generation, reduce waste generation, and limit proliferation risk. Following Andy, Dan Poneman, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Centrist Energy, will speak. And Dan, again, as I said, is the President and CEO of Centrist. He serves also on the company's board of directors. From 2009 through 2014, Dan was the Deputy Secretary of Energy and also served as the Chief Operating Officer of the U.S. Department of Energy. His responsibilities span the range of U.S. energy policies and programs, including hydrocarbons, renewables, nuclear, and efficiency, including cybersecurity, project management, national security, and international cooperation. He was responsible for the department's efforts on resilience and emergency response in cases ranging from Fukushima to Hurricane Sandy. Between April 23rd, 2013 and May 21st, 2013, Mr. Poneman served as the Acting Secretary of Energy. And next up will be Kirk Shnablin. Kirk is the head of sales for Urenco and president of Urenco's North American marketing subsidiary, Urenco Inc., managing Urenco's marketing and sales teams in the US, UK, and China. Mr. Shnablin is responsible for Urenco's relationship with customers around the world. So with that, I'd like to kick off the presentations and invite Monica to lead us off. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, John, for your kind introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here and participate with this seminar. And really have an opportunity to talk to you about some of the opportunities and challenges of the HALEU economy. May I have the next slide, please? The United States is pursuing an aggressive plan to combat climate change by reducing carbon emissions, of which nuclear power is set to play a vital role, as we all know. Development of advanced reactors designs introduce evolving nuclear fuel cycles that deviate from the commercially established LWRs. We don't know what the new fuel cycles will look like, but we do know what they need to do, and that is to be cost competitive, manage waste and proliferation risk, and address safety and security. May I have the next slide, please? As we expand from the current LWR economy to address cost competitiveness, new advanced reactors design emerge that include new fuel characteristics, specifically related to HALEU, the items listed in purple. Higher uranium enrichments with different compositions and fuel forms, new coolants and moderators, and other characteristics such as frequent and continuous refueling that play a key role in how do we do our fuel supply models. Next slide, please. As we expand from an LWR design, we need to address new front-end and back-end and proliferation risk challenges. Today's webinar will be focusing on availability of high-assay LEU or HALEU. Next slide, please. In 2020, okay, there we go. Sorry, my screen has a little delay. In 2020, we held a HALEU workshop where we convey a team of experts from industry and national laboratories to evaluate the anticipated demand, the timing, and identify options. This meeting was co-hosted by ANEI, INGAIN, and EPRI, and we had over 300 participants from 70 different organizations. In the bottom of the slide, I have listed the links of all the presentations and the list of all the registered attendees for your information. INL developed a workshop report with contributions from the Uranium Enrichment and Downblending organizations, and I will be presenting the compilation of this report. Please note that this is an independent report, and the views and opinions presented today are those of the authors and not necessarily state or reflect those of the Department of Energy. Now I have the next slide, please. I have structured the discussion as following. First, I will cover anticipated demand, the timing, and what are the near-term options. I will follow by the importance of having an integrated supply strategy and what an initial right size capability looks like. And we'll finalize with some recommendations. May I have the next slide, please? Let us first look at the anticipated demand for HALEU. Note that the needs for HALEU are not new. For example, since the late 70s, NNSA has led the conversion of HALEU research reactors to HALEU fuel, and those efforts are currently ongoing. Recently, as new markets for nuclear energy systems have emerged, there has been an increased demand for HALEU that has been identified by reactor developers, specifically to support new applications. For example, new applications related to LWRs, seeking improvements in reactor economics, also accident-tolerant fuels and new metallic fuels. Advanced LWRs mainly have enrichments below 10%, which we refer to sometimes as LEU+. There is an economic reason to make this differentiation, which I will discuss further. There is also a need for HALEU to support the deployment of Gen 4 and other advanced reactors, such as SMRs, mobile and micro reactors, for new industrial applications such as desalination, process heat, and off-grid electricity production, to name a few. This is in addition to the currently no high-assay LEU government needs that support Department of Defense and Department of Energy, advanced reactors demonstrations, research and test reactors, and the long-term NNSA mission of fueling converted research reactors, medical isotope productions, and space missions. Some key points to keep in mind as we move through this conversation. The fastest projected growth for HALEU comes from industrial needs, but the demand is speculative. Industry demand for HALEU comes in a variety of emerging nuclear power applications, which drives different emerging reactors design that require a variety of fuel forms, including uranium oxides, metal alloys, nitrates, and carbides. On the other hand, government needs are very predictable with a high fidelity knowledge and demand, and also very well-known fuel forms. May I have the next slide, please? As the fastest growing demand for HALEU is driven by the commercial sector, so is the timing for this demand. Timing is influenced by when and which of the emerging reactor concepts matures towards commercialization. Commercializing 1 or 2 units is not sufficient to reach a sustainable market. The market needs to evolve towards sustainability, which will only be achieved when a large enough customer base allows us to secure long-term procurement purchase agreements, fuel procurement models, and infrastructure financing tools. It is important to keep in mind that the HALEU market will differ from the LEU procurement and financing models, as many proposed reactors refuel only once or have significantly longer refueling needs. There is a higher upfront cost for the fuel, unlike LEUs, which allows us to amortize the cost of the fuel throughout the life of the reactor. Given the nature of a gradual transition toward a sustainable market, the timing is not predictable. May I have the next slide? In the near term, the HALEU need is driven by advanced reactor developers' deployment schedules, who are eager to penetrate an evolving world market. Currently, the United States has no commercial facilities to produce HALEU for either civilian or US government needs, but we can produce some limited quantities of HALEUs in 2 ways. By downblending existing and recovered HALEU from uranium of lower enrichments. Currently, there are very limited HALEU stocks available for downblending beyond those who have already been obligated to the NNSA mission. There is also a limited supply of HALEU available from recovering and downblending HALEU stocks at Idaho National Laboratory, Savannah Riverside, and Y-12. And there is only one NRC licensed commercial entity that can downblend HALEU, which is BWXT. The enduring alternative is uranium enrichments, which we will be discussing today. There are currently 3 commercial entities in the United States that could produce HALEU by enrichment, provided favorable market conditions exist. And Urenco and Centrist will be discussing those. However, there are also some limitations that we have today. Some of the early movers, reactor early movers, are not able to use recovered materials or receive UF6 as the feedstock. And near-term options are limited, and there is not sufficient funding for these options. May I have the next slide, please? Without a domestic supply, the only option is to import HALEU from another country, but is reseeding the HALEU market to foreign suppliers, such as Russia and China. With enrichment being the only viable long-term HALEU supply option, what are the attributes that can support the successful of this deployment of an initial capability? HALEU supply chain is not only building enrichment capability. It requires addressing the conversion and fuel fabrications, and if facilities are not co-locating, addressing transportation. HALEU over 10% enriched requires meeting physical security category 2 requirements, which also requires a significant investment. In the figure that you see in this slide, you can see how maximizing the utilization of LEU expanded to LEU plus enrichment infrastructure significantly decreases the size of the HALEU category 2 enrichment facility, resulting in lower costs and a more competitive production of HALEU. Over 90% of the separative work required to enrich natural uranium is in the 0.72 to 10% range, or LEU plus. LEU plus can be enriched in a category 3 facility. As the conversion of HALEU enriched above 10% also needs to be conducted in a physical category 2 facility, co-locating the HALEU facility, enrichment, deconversion, and perhaps fuel fabrication with the LEU enrichment facility decreases the cost of transportation and leverages security cost. Co-locations of facilities results in the most economic HALEU production model. In addition, providing deconversion services also allows fuel fabricators the ability to receive HALEU in a form that is directly suitable for fuel fabrication. May I have the next slide, please? Building co-locating enrichment and deconversion services allows the economic option to supply HALEU, but what is the right size for this initial capability? One can address the projected demand by looking at two different groups. The known and enduring, which we refer to as the high fidelity market, that is driven by government commitments that support NNSA's reactor conversion, the demonstrations from DOE and DOD, and other test and research missions from DOE. This demand can be readily quantified and is estimated to be between 20 and 22 metric tons by the mid-2020s, with a rate of about 8 to 12 metric tons per year. Today's needs are partially being met by downblending government-owned HALEU stocks. These stocks are valuable assets. If another source of HALEU existed today, government-owned stocks could be preserved to support and extend the government missions. The second group is the emerging commercial demand, which is unknown but expected, and it is harder to quantify. NEI has published the estimated demands through 2030, projecting over 50 metric tons by 2026. And other estimates project over 550 metric tons per year by 2050 to support net zero goals. An initial HALEU capability could prime the pump for a future market driven by commercial needs and sized to meet the high fidelity HALEU market, plus a percentage of the projection of the commercial demand. May I have the next slide, please? To accelerate the development of a sustainable HALEU supply capability, an initial public-private partnership is recommended to address the high fidelity market, plus a percentage of this commercial demand, which the private sector could incrementally expand in a modular fashion as a sustainable market develops. Given the variety of HALEU applications, the initial HALEU capability must be flexible and able to accommodate uranium enrichments up to 10% as the feed. Enrichment of U-235 varying from 10 to 1975. Supply HALEU at a minimum annual rate of 12 metric tons. modular design concepts to accommodate future growth, and the conversion of US6 to a form suitable for production of a variety of fuel forms to include oxides, metal alloys, nitrates, and carbides. A pricing model that accounts for the added cost of going from LEU or LEU plus should be established by this partnership. In addition, a mechanism such as a leasing model, wholesale, or reserve should be developed to make HALEU available to support commercial needs. This recommendation is based on the best available data of June of 2020. We recognize that there may be more fidelity in some of our projections, but the estimate of the HALEU quantities needed will not differ significantly as the change in initial HALEU capability recommendations. Next slide, please. In closing, the path forward towards developing a HALEU economy represents an opportunity to reinvigorate domestic mining, conversion, enrichment, deconversion, and fuel fabrication services in the United States. But as I have shown, commercial investment will not be done on a speculative basis. Relying upon market forces and demand will not be enough to create the needed HALEU fuel cycle capability at the time that industry were requiring, leaving imports as the only choice. Key to HALEU success is the need for stakeholder policymakers to work in alignment. Congress, Department of Energy, enrichers, reactor development and owners, fuel fabricator, transportation and infrastructure service providers. I am really happy to see in this panel the base stakeholder representation and look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Regalbuto, and we'll move on to Andy Griffith next.
Thank you, Commissioner Gavin. Can you hear me okay?
Hear you fine.
Great, thank you. And thanks to the organizers for having me for the seminar. Monica just gave a great overview of the situation. I hope to add to that with some thoughts from the Office of Nuclear Energy, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk as well as respond to your questions. So clearly the nation's net zero climate objective, the objectives are challenging, and there's really, I don't see any path to being successful without the inclusion of nuclear generation. And that's both with the additional light water reactor technology that exists today, but also with the deployment of advanced reactors that require high assay LEU. So fortunately, I think the Energy Act of 2020, which was passed as part of the 5,000-page piece of legislation in December of 2020, provides a good roadmap for the Department of Energy to follow to help support these needs. The Energy Act, it assigns responsibilities to the Secretary of Energy and designates the Office of Nuclear Energy as the execution office responsible for these tasks. And it includes three kind of overarching areas. The first one is to support the transportation and licensing activities, which has some directed engagement between the department and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It provides some direction on developing R&D and financial assistance for the package development, and supports the submission of those package designs to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The second area establishes a HALEU consortium, which is made up of both suppliers and users of high assay LEU. That's going to be a really important body, if you will, to have that dialogue that Monica referred to, that's we believe is going to be essential to having a successful path forward. And the third and last area that the Energy Act covers is the HALEU acquisition, making it available to the users and assessing the demands going forward. So with that, it does include as options those sources that Monica covered in her presentation, both DOE stocks and conversion of existing material where it makes sense, and when it can be done in a way that's efficient, effective, and in some cases, while it might be relatively expensive, it does offset the liabilities of otherwise dispositioning that material. So there's some net benefit there. Really the long-term objective in this third area is probably the most essential of all, and that is to establish a U.S. domestic supply of commercially available high-assay LEU. It includes, as part of this, a cost recovery element, which we think is really essential. The one area that it does not address, and that we're working and engaging with Congress, hopefully to have included in some piece of legislation in the future, is the ability to reinvest that cost recovery into a revolving fund so that the program can become more sustainable without the dependence on annual appropriations. So we think that's a really important element that we would like to see added. But as a whole, the Energy Act does a really good job of kind of comprehensively addressing this challenge. So the needs going forward, Monica mentioned the Nuclear Energy Institute's survey, and we view that as kind of the aspirational top level, most ambitious, most optimistic. If all of the developers are successful in getting all the funding they need, and they don't encounter any substantial technical challenges or regulatory challenges, then that's probably what that number reflects. If we rely on the demand signal of only the advanced reactor demonstration reactors, both the TerraPower Natrium reactor, which is sited in Wyoming, and the X-Energy XE100 4-pack demonstration that's being sited in Washington State. That's kind of the bottom demand, if you will, and that's on the order of about 40 metric tons by the end of the decade. But reality, we think it's more kind of in the middle of the road, and we've developed a scenario, and it's not the scenario, but it's a scenario where if the advanced reactor deployment aspect of the path forward, if we deploy advanced reactors in sufficient quantities to help address that net zero carbon challenge by 2050, what does that HALEU demand look like? We've got a report that we just posted earlier this week. I provided the link with the organizers. I think Kira is going to drop it into chat. But we think this report is going to be really important to have the conversation of what type the advanced reactor deployment picture looks like, and what kind of HALEU is going to be needed to fulfill that deployment successfully. Because the program can't be just to supply HALEU for the ARDP demonstration reactors. We really want to de-risk the early deployment, the early movers of those advanced reactors that are going to be deployed in the late 2020s and the early 2030s to get the technology out there and for the nation to reap the benefits of low carbon nuclear technology. So the stakes are high. You know, if we're not successful in establishing a domestic U.S. supply of HALEU, we're not going to be successful in meeting our objectives. So really taking that to heart, we issued the request for information on the HALEU availability program in December. We just extended the due date for those inputs to February 14th. And we look forward to getting those responses to the request for information and having those conversations subsequent so that we can achieve the best solution on the path forward. So with that, I'll wrap up my remarks. I look forward to the conversation with the panel and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Andy, very enlightening. Next, I'd like to move on to Dan Poneman, who's going to talk to us about what Centrist Energy is up to in this space. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, John. Commissioner Gavin. I want to thank you. I want to thank NARUC and to recall, as I was before the session, the terrific example NARUC has set for many years. When I was at Department of Energy, we worked very closely with NARUC and its leadership on resilience and cybersecurity. And so the thought leadership and bringing all the commissioners together the way you do is terrific. And also want to thank Jasmine and Kira for setting up this session. Next slide, please. We are part of a publicly traded company, so I've got to put these forward-looking statements, but we can just have a quiz on that later, and we can move to the next slide. Let me tell you a little bit as I begin my brief remarks about centrist. Centrist is actually the direct descendant of the Manhattan Project, and the original technology to enrich uranium was developed in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. We still have a facility there. And for several decades, it was part of the Atomic Energy Commission. For a couple of decades, it was part of the Department of Energy. And in 1998, the United States became the only country in the world to privatize this activity. And centrist is now the heir of that. When you saw Monica in her slide deck referring to the one capacity extant in the United States of a 16 machine cascade, the American Centrifuge Operating Enterprise, that is part of centrist. So just to start at the basics, what is HALEU? The 93 reactors that are still operating in the United States, and I would say roughly 400 of the 440 or so that are operating internationally, use low enriched uranium. The uranium you pull out of the ground has 0.7% of the uranium-235 isotope. That's okay for a natural uranium reactor, but you need to enrich that up to about beer level, about 3 to 5%. To sustain these light water reactors that are the dominant form of reactor in the United States and globally. And many people are also very familiar with the high enriched uranium. If you take that same technology that you apply to the natural uranium and keep cranking up the concentration of uranium-235 to 90%, that's really strong stuff, and it will produce either a mushroom cloud and a bomb, or a naval reactor fuel, which is a very powerful fuel and very small package that can fit inside a submarine or an aircraft carrier. So why are we talking about this middle category of high assay, low enriched uranium? It's a mouthful, which we shorten to HALEU. And it's because you get much better performance characteristics as you increase the concentration. We use the analogy to vintage port, a higher octane, so to speak, fuel, which delivers the kind of advantages that small modular reactors are generating so much enthusiasm and excitement around the world about. But it is just below the 20% threshold that is considered high enriched uranium. And when you get to that 20% threshold, you get all kinds of regulatory overburden because of the risk that high enriched uranium could be diverted to weapons use. So let's go to the next slide, please. So it turns out that to obtain these enhanced performance characteristics, most of the advanced reactors that are being developed nowadays require this high assay LEU or HALEU. There are some that don't. The ones that you've been reading about lately, NuScale, General Electric, and so forth, they do not. But the 9 out of the 10 reactors that won awards under the program that Andy Griffith just described, the Advanced Reactor Development Program, they all require HALEU. Oklo, which is another reactor developer, they require HALEU. And so if this technology is going to meet the target that Andy Griffith, I think, properly adduced, which is to hit net zero total economic emissions by 2050, and of course there's more ambitious goals of net zero from power generation by 2035, we really need this this kind of technology to succeed. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what are we doing to try to advance the cause here? Well, we are very excited, and I have to really sincerely thank the United States Department of Energy. Our company has entered into a 3-year cost share contract, which we are now just coming up to the end of, to develop the most advanced gas centrifuge plants in the world. We are now nearing the end of that contract. We've completed assembly of 16 centrifuges. Last June, we were very proud to get the first Nuclear Regulatory Commission license anywhere to enrich uranium up to 19.75%. That was a very big deal, and we will look forward to finishing our work on that cascade. And we're looking forward to the opportunity to actually run that cascade, because as Monica put in her slide, we can get almost a whole metric ton per year just out of those machines. Of course, just as Andy said, 2 demonstration reactors don't create an industry. Same here, 16 machines is a great demonstration. Our goal, obviously, is to expand and greatly expand that cascade of 16 machines into a much larger capability that would sustain these very ambitious demand curves that you've seen. And whether it's the high case, the middle case, or the low case, one thing we know for sure is we don't want the lack of fuel to constrain the ability of these new reactors to contribute carbon-free energy to the grid. So let's go to the next slide, please. It's important to recognize we've been talking, and quite properly so, about the very important energy and climate objectives to be fulfilled. But these are not the only objectives that need to be filled when it comes to uranium enrichment. As I mentioned, the birth of uranium enrichment came in a national security capacity, which was the uranium that was enriched in the Manhattan Project to create our nuclear arsenal. There are continuing requirements because our existing nuclear arsenal has reservoirs of tritium in the weapons themselves. Tritium has a half-life of 12.5 years, and you need unobligated, which means basically US origin technology, enriched uranium to create the tritium that goes into those weapons. You also will eventually need highly enriched uranium. We have a lot of fuel stored up from the Cold War that are operating the reactors that are in the submarines and the aircraft carriers. Ultimately, that will need to be replaced also by US origin material. And there are also very exciting programs you may have read about in the press in which the Army and the Air Force are also looking at microreactors that have real benefits in terms of reducing vulnerability to troops getting killed in defense of diesel fuel supply chains, and in terms of having always on 7/24 reliable grid in the face of potentially military situations in which resilience is going to be critical. And there are many other missions besides. We could spend a whole seminar talking about non-proliferation, other forms of advanced reactors, and space missions. But for now, just put a pin in that and understand that as we do things to defend the climate and our energy objectives, we're also doing things to advance our national security. Let's carry on. So this is a question that Monica, I think, addressed and framed quite nicely in her original laydown. There is a clear governmental demand signal, but it's not big enough to sustain a whole commercial industry. There's a potentially massive commercial demand signal, but it's not here yet, and nobody's going to invest a lot of private capital for a demand signal that doesn't exist. So this is a real head scratcher. Monica, in her slide deck, I think quite probably talked about a public-private partnership. And the good news is this is not actually a novel problem, and it's not a problem that has been blocking us from achieving our long-term goals. And all we got to do is go back to the future, which you'll see on the next slide. We have done this before, right? We had a national security imperative in the 1950s to build out a nuclear capability. And that was what supplied the investment dollars that went into the development of enrichment plants that supplied the nuclear navy and our earliest phases of our own nuclear arsenal. What's a little less known is that in addition to rather famous investment the government made, and Admiral Rickover basically handed over the keys of the design of the light water reactor he developed for the submarine program to folks in Pennsylvania that led to the creation of the very first commercial reactor in Shippingport. But the year before he started Shippingport, he actually made $1 billion, which is like $9 or $10 billion in today's value, worth of indeed uranium and enriched uranium to support the propagation of nuclear power, not only in the United States, but globally as well. And in fact, it was that set of investments and that kind of leadership and that kind of public-private partnership that succeeded in not only sustaining our national security requirements, but also launching this worldwide nuclear industry, in which in the United States, as is known, 20% of our electricity still comes from nuclear sources, and over half of our carbon-free electricity. We can do this again. And while it's very, very interesting to see the set of studies, and Andy was kind enough to share the link to their new study that came out of Idaho National Laboratory, and he referred to the new Nuclear Energy Institute projection. You know, we're talking about hundreds of tons passing, according to the NEI estimates, at least passing 100 metric tons of annual demand by the end of this decade. But the good thing about enrichment is you can build enrichment plants faster than you can build reactors. So we don't actually have to guess, but what we do have to do is get off the dime. And if there's one message I would say is one that I hope folks come away with, is if we want to have a prayer to make our net zero goals, whether it's net zero from the federal government by 2030, net zero power by 2035, net zero economy by 2050, we need more nuclear, and a lot of it, and fast. We do not have time to waste. We've been treading water, frankly, and this new generation of advanced reactors is a very promising way to go. And if we can, and I think NARUC can have a very important voice in this discussion, get past this current chicken and egg conundrum, enter into a public-private partnership, leverage the force of the Energy Act of 2020 and the requirements Andy has just referred to, add into it the kind of investments that have been talked about in the Congress and the bipartisan infrastructure package, and in Build Back Better, if something can be salvaged from that, we can do this. This is not beyond our ken. This is not beyond our capability. What it takes is vision and leadership. And with the leadership of NARUC and people around the screens and my colleagues here in the seminar, I think we can do it. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. That was really enlightening, and you laid it out very clearly for us. The challenge ahead is huge. With that, I'd like to next turn it over to Kirk Shnablin. And Kirk is with Urenco, who is another firm in the enrichment space. So Kirk, take it away. Kirk, are you ready to go?
Yep,
Oh, okay.
just struggling with my mute button.
Oh,
Thank
no
you,
worries.
Commissioner Gavin. I appreciate the prior presentations and the opportunity to discuss with the audience these very important questions. Just a brief introduction of Urenco. Urenco is a multinational company. We've been developing and evolving mature centrifuge designs for the purpose of enriching uranium for over 50 years. We've got 4 operating facilities around the world, including in the United States, and generate about 35% of the enriched uranium required by the world's existing light water reactors. I certainly do agree with Monica and Dan that there's a role for the federal government to facilitate the development of a domestic HALEU fuel cycle. And Andy outlined the responsibilities that are already assumed by the government under the Energy Act. I think there may also be opportunities for collaboration with other Western governments who have similar goals. There are other programs like ITER that as a example of those. This, a Western, I guess I'll underscore a few previous comments that a Western HALEU fuel cycle is absolutely critical because, and I think we can all agree, it would be extraordinarily imprudent for utility customers here to be asked to finance billions in advanced reactor investments if those reactors rely exclusively on what are really uncertain fuel supplies from Russia and other state-owned enterprises. Given the current political environment domestically, however, it seems prudent to have an alternate plan if federal appropriations for a HALEU fuel cycle are inadequate or untimely. I think fortunately from a uranium enrichment perspective, at least, there is a pathway for US industry to not be exclusively dependent on federal funding. The technology to enrich uranium is already mature, and modern enrichment facilities that can be leveraged already exist. Can I get the first slide, please? Urenco operates the state-of-the-art uranium enrichment facility in New Mexico that's on the back of the slide that was financed entirely on the basis of long-term contracts with nuclear utility customers without funding from the US or any other government. We licensed this facility in 2006 and production began in 2010. Expansion of the facilities was executed in parallel with continued production throughout 2018, resulted in finally a $5 billion investment in Lee County, New Mexico, and southeastern New Mexico, where we're a very proud member of the Energy Plex in that area of the world. We are the only producer of enriched uranium in the United States, and we produce at this facility about a third of the requirements of all US reactors. We also have customers in Japan and Europe that we serve from this facility. Can I get the next slide, please? And you'll be glad to know this is the last slide, so there will be time for some questions here. We're already working, Urenco is already working on the production of HALEU and has divided that work into 2 phases. In the first phase, which is underway, we are spending about $30 million to relicense the entire existing plant to produce up to 10% enriched uranium. This is a straightforward licensing process and follows an earlier successful effort to relicense the plant, which increased our limit from 5 to 5.5% enriched uranium in early 2020. The ability to produce up to 10% enriched uranium is important on its own to meet emerging demand in the range of 5 to 10% for existing nuclear reactors, but is also important as a stepping stone for the production of 10 to 20% enriched uranium. A separate but co-located building to produce up to 20% enriched uranium could be made smaller and less expensive, as Monica alluded to, by using uranium enriched up to 10% as feedstock. Such a co-located building that also leverages existing workforce, infrastructure, regulatory relations, and community support could be built for a pretty reasonable capital investment. This level of investment could conceivably be financed in the same way that existing facility was financed, namely through long-term takeoff contracts with the US government for its high fidelity demand and from advanced reactor operators. So I am using this opportunity to make an ask of all of you in the audience who serve on utility commissions. When you deliberate the prudency of contracts for HALEU in the future that underwrite construction of new facilities, please recognize that they will be longer than typical fuel supply contracts and prices are likely to be higher than those offered by Russian state-owned organizations. They will also, however, lead to the development of an increasingly competitive and secure source of fuel for advanced reactors required for a reduced carbon energy future. I'm going to stop right there so that we've got a little bit of time for questions.
Thank you very much, Kirk. And you know, I think you've kind of teed us up for the first question, and that is what, you know, for the panel, what are the roles that state utility regulators in securing HALEU supply chain resources can play? You know, you kind of talked about, you know, the cost recovery of utility fuel supplies, but what else can we do today to assist in advancing these programs? Anyone want to take that?
Well, I'll just supplement. I mean, I think Kirk gave a very nice first step by recognizing that the cheap and easy fix of relying on a single foreign source would be a sort of penny wise, pound foolish move. I think my sense, John, would be that public utility commissioners need to look for the long-term interest of the ratepayers and the resilience and energy security. It's clearly one of the challenges that nuclear has faced generally, not just with HALEU, is recognition of the resilience that in the face of a polar vortex or, you know, Hurricane Harvey, right, would be provided, not to mention its carbon-free attributes, et cetera. So I would say that, you know, PUCs with their public service mandate to look at a slightly less myopic and more long-term way of what is the long-term sustainable, and then it will be both economically competitive, but also environmentally responsible. That kind of statesmanship would be exactly the kind of thing that I think would be deep in the fabric and the DNA of NARUC and its members.
I would just,
Oh, sorry.
I would just add to that, regarding the long view and the long-term commitment, the Build Back Better bill that's under consideration by the Senate now has a piece of a part of it that addresses the HALEU supply, and it would provide $500 million up front to essentially commit to a long-term production of HALEU, which would go a long way to de-risk the production in a sustainable way, and it would get that technology out there available and scalable to meet the needs of the future. So the jury's still out, or I guess the Congress votes are still pending on whether that part of the bill is going to survive, if the bill is going to survive. But we're hopeful that it does succeed and that it finds its way into law and action. Sorry, Kirk, go ahead.
No, I was just going to echo what Dan said, that I think from a utility commission perspective, for if you're considering or in a position to consider advanced reactors that are entering a rate base, consider the sustainability of those reactors and how they're going to be fueled in the long term, and communicate with the applicants your interest in that sustainability.
Yeah,
Thank you
and
very much.
I will just add that remember, the market is expanding for these advanced reactors. So we're no longer talking just about electricity production. We're talking about other applications like desalination and heat generation. So the energy water nexus in this case is very important.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. We have some questions coming in from the audience. Let me start with Dina Sheriff, who is asking what is being done to locate domestic sources of raw materials, I presume uranium feedstocks, in the U.S. to support these projects. So
the challenge with the uranium production in the U.S. is that it has been driven out of the market essentially by state-owned actors globally. However, part of our thinking is that we would engage with existing uranium production producers. There are a substantial number of existing facilities that have basically gone to standby that could turn back on. And so we would hope to engage with them as part of our supply chain establishment.
And I would just very quickly add, I know we're short of time, but this is where the ecosystem of the national security complex and the energy needs of the country converge. Because as we look to eventually create enriched uranium for defense purposes, for tritium, for naval reactor fuel, that by law must come from domestic resources. That means mined and converted into gas and enriched in U.S. plants. And I invite, maybe they can put up on the link, people to look at the Energy Futures Initiative paper of 2017 that talks about the intersection of these complexes. But that's another way, very specifically and very targeted, that notwithstanding getting underbid by state-owned enterprises from abroad, U.S. Resources can be brought back into play.
Great, thank you very much. On that note, perhaps for Andy, what kind of information are you hoping to gather from the RFI that you've issued on the HALEU subject?
So there's a range of areas we've asked questions regarding interest in being part of the consortium. We've also asked questions regarding projections on HALEU needs. This would be independent of the NEI survey that was performed that we want to build on. The Act does require that we do a survey biennially, so we're trying to start that process. We ask on thoughts of how to best go about acquiring HALEU, what challenges are involved in establishing a commercial supply chain, regulatory legal challenges, and also we've included the priority of the current administration regarding equity and energy justice. So a range of questions there. It's a fairly broad RFI, and of course there's the catch-all. If there's something that we didn't ask but should ask, please let us know your thoughts.
Great, thank you. Another interesting question is the Energy Act of 2020 sunsets the HALEU program by 2034 or earlier, and DOE does not want to be involved any longer than necessary. So what conditions do we need to see established for DOE to end their involvement and this process take on a life of its own?
I'll take a stab at that. I think I'll just reiterate what Monica said, that we need to see that very large but uncertain industrial demand have achieve a greater degree of fidelity. If we can, I think that's actually plenty of time for a mature market to emerge, and an emerging mature market will give certainty to investors in fuel cycle facilities and give confidence that they will be able to get their money back and be a sustainable supplier.
And if I may add, you do want to have a stable demand for highest LEU, right? You don't want to have an intermittent demand, because when we build centrifuges, we want to operate those centrifuges continuously, right? To make them economic. So we don't want to have stop and go. We want this smooth, continuous market. And we didn't discuss much in detail, but the consortium or the idea of a bank or whatever we're looking at to smooth that curve is really what will create a very sustainable market.
Yeah, and very, very quickly, I would say in one sentence, we need critical mass.
Right.
The high fidelity.
More ways than one.
Yeah, yeah, I got more of a laugh than I expected, but the high fidelity demand that Monica cited is sufficient to get us started. That could bring in the sufficient demand to get people to finance and bring in commercial funds. Once the commercial funds come in, because our technology can be expanded in a modular fashion, it will sustain itself, and we can provide cheaper HALEU to the government and also to the industry.
And that's exactly why it's so important to de-risk those early movers in the advanced reactor orders following the successful demonstrations. And I don't think we have to wait until the demonstrations are up and operating. We need to think about having soon to follow reactors, not limited to the 2 demonstration reactors, because there's other concepts out there that are gaining maturity and development faster, as well, outside of the 2 ARDP demos.
Great, thank you very much. This has really been a very, very useful session, and I want to thank everyone for participating. We have quite a few folks on the call right now, so I think this has been a great vehicle to get the word out about how critical this issue is and what we're doing to try to address it. So thanks again to all of our presenters and to the NARUC staff for putting this together. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kira for any parting words.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you for stepping in and helping us organize this webinar with such an excellent panel. Thanks to all of our panelists, and of course also to the U.S. Department of Energy Nuclear Energy Office for sponsoring the DOE NARUC Nuclear Energy Partnership. So we do have some upcoming events. The NARUC Winter Policy Summit is happening February 13th through 16th. Hopefully everyone saw the announcement that went out yesterday about that the meeting is now hybrid. So you can attend either virtually or in person. As part of the Winter Policy Summit, the Subcommittee on Nuclear Issues and the Staff Subcommittee on Nuclear Issues will be meeting Sunday afternoon from 3:30 to 5. We'll be sending out an agenda for that meeting shortly. And then tentatively, we are currently working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on setting up an NRC NARUC information session. That would be the afternoon of Wednesday, February 16th from 2 to 5 p.m. This would be open to NARUC members only. We'll send out more information as we continue to finalize some of the details with the NRC, But I did want to announce this event so that NARUC members can save the date and consider that as you're making your travel plans to Washington, D.C. if you'll be joining us in person. So with that, I think on behalf of the co-chairs of the Nuclear Energy Partnership, Commissioner Tim Echols from Georgia and Commissioner Anthony O'Donnell from Maryland, I want to thank everyone for joining today. Hopefully we will see you either virtually or in person at the NARUC meeting in about a month. And please stay tuned for more events for the Nuclear Energy Partnership from NARUC. Thanks very much.
Thanks again, everyone. It's been really valuable. Take care.
Thank you very much.
I know.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.